Under the golden glow of the evening lights, the ballroom echoed with laughter, music, and the clicking of glasses. The charity event was in full swing, with wealthy guests in elegant suits and dresses gathering around polished tables. For most, it was an evening of showing off, making deals behind handshakes, and pretending to care for the cause. For one man, however, it was just another obligation. He stood near the corner of the room, his tall figure straight, his dark suit perfectly fitted, his expression unreadable. He was the CEO. Everyone knew, the kind of man newspapers wrote about and employees whispered about when he walked by. To the world, he was powerful, successful, and unreachable. But inside, he carried a silence so heavy that even the noise of the crowded ballroom could not break it. He looked at the dancers moving gracefully across the polished floor. The band played a soft, joyful tune, couples twirled under the lights, and he remained still. He had been invited by the organizers because his presence meant donations would follow. People admired his wealth, his company, and his reputation, but no one really saw the man behind the title. They smiled at him, spoke politely, and then hurried to their groups, leaving him once again with the familiar emptiness. As his eyes moved across the room, they settled on a small figure at the far side of the hall. A little girl sat in a wheelchair, tucked near the edge where no one paid attention. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, her hair tied with a bright ribbon, her hands resting quietly on her lap. While the other children ran around or danced playfully with their parents, she remained still, watching with longing eyes. Every time someone spun across the floor, her face lit up for a moment, but then the glow dimmed as reality reminded her she could not join them. The CEO's gaze lingered. He did not know why, but he felt pulled toward her. Something in her expression mirrored his own loneliness, hers born from limitation, his born from isolation. Without realizing it, his feet began to carry him closer. He walked past the chatter, past the polite greetings, and finally stopped in front of her. She looked up at him, surprised at first, and then gave a shy smile. "Hello," he said softly, lowering his voice in a way he rarely did with adults. "Hi," she replied, her voice small but clear. For a moment, there was silence between them. He didn't know what to say. He had attended countless meetings, given powerful speeches, and signed contracts worth millions, yet here he was, standing speechless before a child. She broke the silence with words that would change the course of his evening, and perhaps his life. "Can you teach me to dance?" she asked. The question caught him completely off guard. He blinked, unsure if he heard her correctly. Dance. He hadn't danced in years, not since he was young and life was simpler. He was a businessman, not a teacher, and certainly not the right person to guide a child in such a thing. His first instinct was to smile politely and step away. But something in her eyes stopped him. They were not just curious, they were pleading. It wasn't about the steps of the dance. It was about belonging, about being seen, about not sitting on the sidelines once again. He glanced at the polished floor where the music flowed and the couples moved. His throat tightened. Everyone was watching the glamorous performers, but no one noticed this little girl who wanted nothing more than to feel included. For reasons he could not explain, he bent slightly so he was at her level. "I don't know if I'm a very good teacher," he said with a faint smile. Her lips curved upward. "That's okay. I just want to try." Her words disarmed him. They were so innocent, so honest, without any of the masks adults wore. He nodded slowly and held out his hand. She hesitated for just a second before placing her small hand in his. Her fingers were warm, delicate, and trusting. The CEO pulled an empty chair from beside her and sat down. The music continued in the background, and the two of them began their own quiet dance lesson. He tapped lightly on her palm, guiding her to move her hands in rhythm. She giggled as he exaggerated his own movements, showing her how to sway with the music. The wheelchair didn't matter to her in that moment. The rhythm, the laughter, and the attention filled the gap she had long carried. "See," he said softly. "It's not about steps. It's about feeling the music." She nodded, eyes shining, and followed his gentle lead. They swayed together, her arms moving in playful circles, his movements slow and patient. To anyone else, it might not have looked like dancing at all. But to her, it was magic. She was no longer the girl sitting alone in the corner. She was a dancer, twirling in her own way, guided by someone who cared enough to try. Onlookers began to notice. Conversations paused, and soon eyes turned toward the pair in the corner. Whispers spread across the room, but no one interrupted. Something about the sight touched even the most hardened hearts. The powerful CEO, known for his stern reputation, was laughing gently as he moved in time with a little girl in a wheelchair. Her joy radiated outward, softening the polished walls of the ballroom. He felt it too, something shift inside him. For years, his life had been filled with numbers, reports, and silent nights in empty mansions. He had told himself he was fine, that success was enough. But here, in this simple dance, he felt more alive than he had in a long time. He realized how much he had missed connection, how much he had starved for something genuine. "You're a good dancer," he said to her with a chuckle. She laughed, shaking her head. "No, you're just a good teacher." He looked at her closely. No one had ever called him that before. He wasn't sure if he deserved the word, but at that moment, he didn't care. He just wanted to keep seeing her smile. As the song ended, she clapped happily, clinging to his hand. "Can we do it again?" she asked. He glanced around the room, noticing the many eyes on them. Normally, attention made him retreat into his cold mask of professionalism. Tonight, he did not care. He nodded. "Yes, we can." And so, they continued. One song blended into the next, each moment drawing them closer. The laughter of the little girl filled the air, and the CEO felt his own laughter joining hers. It was clumsy, it was imperfect, and it was the most beautiful dance he had ever known. By the time the music slowed, the girl leaned back in her chair, her face glowing. He remained beside her, strangely unwilling to return to his world of stiff handshakes and hollow conversations. In her presence, he was not the CEO everyone feared or admired. He was just a man rediscovering the simple joy of human connection. As the evening carried on, he realized something had shifted. That small voice, "Can you teach me to dance?" had stirred a part of him he thought had long vanished. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The night of the charity event had passed, but the memory of that small hand in his lingered with him long after the lights dimmed. The CEO returned to his office the next morning, a place filled with glass walls, polished wood, and silence that echoed too loudly. Normally, he would dive straight into numbers, contracts, and endless meetings. That morning, however, his mind kept drifting back to the little girl in the wheelchair. He remembered her laugh, the sparkle in her eyes when she moved to the music, and the way she had called him a good teacher. It was such a simple thing, but for him, it felt like something rare, a reminder of life outside his carefully built walls. He sat behind his desk, staring at the city skyline through the tall windows. On the table before him, his phone buzzed with reminders of urgent calls, investors waiting, and meetings lined up. Yet he didn't move. For once, the empire he had built did not demand his full attention. He kept hearing her words, "Can you teach me to dance?" That innocent request had broken through years of coldness, and he realized he wanted to see her again. Later that week, he contacted the charity organizers. With his usual calm but commanding tone, he asked for the details of the girl he had met. At first, they hesitated, worried about privacy, but his genuine concern softened their doubts. Finally, they told him her name Lily. She lived with her mother not far from the city, and she had been in her wheelchair since birth. Despite her struggles, she was known for her optimism, her big dreams, and her love for music. He listened quietly, his heart growing heavy and warm at the same time. On a quiet afternoon, the CEO found himself standing outside a modest home. It was nothing like the towering buildings he owned, nothing like the expensive spaces he moved through daily. But as he knocked on the door, he felt a nervousness he hadn't felt in years. When the door opened, Lily's mother appeared, a woman with tired eyes but a kind smile. She looked at him with surprise, recognizing him from news articles and business magazines. Before she could even ask, Lily's voice rang out from inside. "Mom, who is it?" Her mother stepped aside, and there she was, Lily, sitting in her wheelchair near the window, her face lighting up the moment she saw him. "It's you," she exclaimed, her hands clapping together with excitement. The CEO, who was often greeted with cautious respect or cold politeness, felt something unfamiliar, a genuine welcome. He smiled, bowed his head slightly, and said, "I hope I'm not disturbing. I just thought I'd visit." "Not at all," her mother said kindly, though her voice carried traces of caution. "Please, come in." Inside, the house was warm and simple. A few family pictures decorated the walls, and the scent of fresh bread filled the air. He sat across from Lily, who could not stop smiling. "I didn't think I'd see you again," she said. "I wanted to check on my student," he replied softly, and she laughed at the word. That afternoon, they talked. At first, the conversation was about dancing, music, and her favorite songs. She told him how she often watched videos of dancers online, imagining herself moving like them. He listened intently, asking questions, encouraging her to share more. Soon, the talk shifted. She told him about school, about the challenges of always being seen as different, and how sometimes she felt invisible in crowds. He sat silently, every word sinking into him. He knew the feeling of invisibility too, though in a different way. His success had built walls that kept him separate, admired from a distance but never truly seen. For the first time in years, he spoke openly about himself. He told her how he had been so busy building his company that he had forgotten what it felt like to live. He told her about the loneliness of eating meals alone in large, empty rooms, and how the laughter he had shared with her the other night had been the brightest sound he'd heard in a long time. She listened with wide eyes, nodding with understanding far beyond her age. "Maybe," she said softly, "we were both waiting for someone to talk to." The words touched him deeply. He realized she was right. From that day, his visits became regular. Each week, he would stop by, sometimes bringing flowers, sometimes bringing new songs, sometimes just bringing his time. Together, they created small routines. He would tap the beat on the table, and she would move her arms in rhythm, pretending they were performing on the grandest stage. They laughed when he tried to sing off-key, and she teased him for his serious face whenever he tried to concentrate too hard. Slowly, her mother's caution began to fade. She saw how her daughter's eyes sparkled whenever he arrived, how her laughter filled the house in ways it hadn't before. She also saw a change in him. The cold, distant man the world saw as powerful seemed gentler here, more human. He brought not only gifts but patience, kindness, and a rare ability to listen. One evening, as they were practicing, Lily suddenly said, "Do you know what I dream about?" He shook his head. "I dream about dancing on stage one day. Not just in a chair, but really dancing, like the others. Even if it's just once." Her voice didn't carry bitterness, only hope. The CEO felt a lump in his throat. He knew he couldn't promise miracles. But he also knew he couldn't let her dream fade. "You will dance," he said firmly. "Maybe not the way you imagine right now, but in your own way. And I'll be there to see it." Her smile widened, and he knew in that moment he had made a silent vow to her. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. In between his heavy schedules, he found himself planning meetings around his visits to her. Business partners were surprised to see him smile more often, his employees noticed a warmth in his tone, and even he felt lighter, as though a burden he never admitted carrying was slowly lifting. One rainy afternoon, when he arrived at her home, she was waiting with a small notebook. Inside were drawings, sketches of dances she imagined, costumes she dreamed of wearing, and stages filled with lights. She had drawn herself not just sitting but moving, arms stretched wide, joy on her face. He flipped through the pages, each one filled with her imagination, and he realized how powerful hope could be. "You've been working hard," he said gently. "I want to be ready," she replied, determination in her voice. Her determination inspired him. He had built skyscrapers, launched companies, and changed industries, but now he wanted to build something else, an opportunity for this little girl to shine. He began making calls, speaking to organizers, asking about inclusive performances. He didn't tell her yet, but in his mind, a plan was forming. That evening, as he left her house, the rain dripping from his umbrella, he looked up at the cloudy sky. For years, he had lived in silence, chasing numbers and goals that left him empty. Now, because of a child's simple question, he felt purpose again. He realized it wasn't just about teaching her to dance. It was about teaching himself to live. The city outside was busy with its usual noise, cars rushing by, people walking with phones pressed to their ears, neon signs blinking along the streets. But inside his office, the CEO sat quietly at his desk, staring at the notebook Lily had given him. Her drawings of dances filled the pages, each one showing a world she dreamed of but had not yet reached. The sketches were simple, childlike, yet filled with so much hope and determination that they made him feel something he had not felt in years. He closed the book slowly, leaned back in his chair, and thought about how different his life had become since meeting her. Before, every day had been the same: contracts, meetings, long flights, and endless hours in lonely hotel rooms. Now, there was something more. He found himself looking forward to afternoons when he could visit her, moments when laughter replaced silence, and conversations that reminded him he was more than just a businessman. But with those thoughts came a new weight. He realized that Lily trusted him, looked up to him, and believed in his words. When he told her, "You will dance," he hadn't said it lightly. He knew he had made a promise, one that meant more than all the business deals he had ever signed. Breaking it was not an option. The next weekend, he returned to her home. Lily was waiting by the door, her eyes bright, her notebook clutched tightly in her lap. As soon as he stepped inside, she flipped it open and showed him new sketches she had drawn, this time with stage lights, an audience, and herself twirling in her wheelchair as if it were part of the choreography. "I added more," she said eagerly. "I thought about how the lights would look. Do you think people would watch?" "They would," he replied softly. "And they would love every moment." She giggled, tucking the notebook back against her chest, and they began their usual routine. He tapped rhythms on the table, and she moved her arms, swaying with the music. But that day, something was different. She was more serious, more focused, as if she was practicing for something greater than their living room dances. "You're getting better," he said, genuinely impressed by her sense of rhythm. "I want to be ready," she answered firmly. Then she lowered her voice. "Do you think we could really do a performance? For real?" The question hung in the air. He looked at her small face, glowing with hope, and he knew this was the moment where dreams had to become plans. "Yes," he said after a pause. "We can." Her smile widened, and she clapped her hands. "Really?" "Really," he confirmed. "But it will take work. We'll need music, space, and people who can help us." "I'll do it," she said, determination burning in her eyes. Over the next weeks, their visits became longer and more purposeful. He began making calls to people he knew in the city's cultural circles. At first, many of them didn't understand. Why would a powerful CEO be asking about inclusive performances? But his influence carried weight, and slowly, doors opened. A small theater agreed to lend space for rehearsals. A dance instructor, curious about this unusual request, volunteered to help guide them. When he told Lily about it, she was overjoyed. She practiced harder, moving her arms and hands with precision, learning how to spin her wheelchair in rhythm. The CEO stood by her side, clumsy but committed, guiding her as best he could. Sometimes they laughed when they made mistakes, sometimes they grew serious when the moves felt too hard, but they never gave up. Her mother watched quietly from the doorway. At first, she worried that this would lead to disappointment, that her daughter's fragile hope might be broken. But every time she saw the CEO leaning down to help Lily, every time she saw him clapping when Lily nailed a move, her fears slowly faded. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the patience in his tone, and the way Lily's laughter filled the house again. One evening, after a long rehearsal, Lily's mother pulled him aside. "I don't know why you're doing all this," she said softly. "But you've given her something I couldn't, a reason to believe in herself again." "Thank you." He paused, unsure how to answer. For a man who had built empires, words often came easily when it was business. But in this moment, words felt small. He simply nodded and said, "She's given me just as much." As the weeks went by, the bond between him and Lily deepened. They were no longer just teacher and student, not even just friends. They were something more, two people who had found in each other what they had been missing. For him, it was the warmth of connection. For her, it was the belief that her dreams mattered. The rehearsal space at the theater became their second home. The instructor showed Lily how to use her wheelchair as part of her performance, turning its spins and turns into graceful movements. The CEO often joined in, learning alongside her, stumbling but never quitting. Sometimes, they stayed late into the evening, the empty theater filled with the sound of music, their laughter echoing off the walls. One night, as they sat on the edge of the stage, Lily looked up at him and asked, "Why do you help me so much?" He was silent for a moment, staring at the dark rows of seats. Then he said quietly, "Because when you asked me to teach you to dance, you gave me something I didn't know I needed. You reminded me that life is more than numbers and work. You reminded me how to smile again." Her eyes softened, and she nodded, as if she understood perfectly. "Then I'll keep dancing," she whispered. And she did. Day after day, week after week, her moves grew stronger, her confidence brighter. The CEO, too, found himself changing. His employees noticed he no longer walked through the office with the same heavy expression. He smiled more, listened more, and even laughed at small things. People whispered about what had changed him, but no one knew the truth, that it was a little girl in a wheelchair who had taught him more than any boardroom ever could. As the day of the charity performance drew closer, excitement filled the air. The organizers agreed to let Lily perform as part of the event. The CEO had arranged everything: the lights, the stage, even the music she had chosen. But deep inside, he worried. What if she grew nervous? What if people didn't understand the beauty of what she was about to show them? The night before the performance, he visited her. She was practicing in her room, her notebook open beside her. He watched her spin her chair, her arms moving with grace, and then he stepped forward. "Are you ready?" he asked. She looked at him, her eyes shining but a little nervous. "What if they laugh?" He knelt beside her, took her hand, and said firmly, "They won't. And even if they don't understand, I will be there. I will be clapping the loudest. You won't be alone." Her small fingers tightened around his, and she whispered, "Then I'm ready." In that moment, he realized the promise he had made was no longer just about helping her dance. It was about standing by her, no matter what. The stage was waiting, and with it, a chance to show the world what hope, courage, and connection could create. The evening of the charity performance arrived, and the entire city seemed alive with anticipation. Guests in elegant clothes filled the hall, their conversations echoing off the high ceilings. The chandeliers sparkled above them, and the polished floor reflected the glow of the lights. For most of the people there, it was just another event, another chance to show off wealth, make connections, and applaud politely at the right moments. But for one little girl, sitting in her wheelchair backstage, it was the most important night of her life. Lily clutched her notebook tightly, her hands trembling slightly. Her mother smoothed her hair and whispered encouragement, but the nervousness in Lily's eyes did not fade. She had dreamed about this moment for months, drawing it in sketches, imagining it in her heart. Now it was real, and fear tried to sneak in. What if the audience laughed? What if she forgot her moves? What if all her hopes broke under the bright lights? Just then, the CEO stepped in. He was dressed in a simple black suit, but his presence carried a calmness that steadied her. He knelt beside her chair, lowering himself so their eyes met. "You're ready," he said firmly. Lily shook her head slightly. "What if I mess up?" "You won't," he replied, his voice quiet but strong. "And even if you do, it won't matter. Because when they see you, they won't see mistakes. They'll see courage. They'll see someone who refused to sit on the sidelines. And I'll be right there with you." Her small shoulders straightened, and she let out a shaky breath. "Will you dance with me?" He smiled. "Always." Moments later, the announcer's voice filled the hall, calling attention to the next performance. The audience grew quiet, curious about what was to come. When Lily rolled onto the stage, the spotlight followed her, casting a warm glow that made her look radiant. The crowd stirred with surprise. They had expected polished dancers, but instead, they saw a little girl in a wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for the music to begin. Then the CEO stepped onto the stage beside her. A murmur spread through the room. People knew him as the powerful businessman who rarely showed emotion in public, but here he was, standing on stage not as a leader in a suit, but as a partner to a child. The music began soft at first, then rising with rhythm. Lily lifted her arms, her hands moving gracefully through the air, her chair spinning in time with the melody. The CEO moved beside her, clapping softly to keep rhythm, guiding her with gestures. Every move she had practiced came alive under the lights. The wheelchair did not hold her back, it became part of her dance, spinning like a partner, gliding across the stage with elegance. Gasps filled the audience. Some leaned forward, eyes wide, as they watched the unexpected beauty unfolding before them. Her arms stretched wide, her face glowing with joy, and the CEO moved beside her, sometimes mimicking her gestures, sometimes stepping back to let her shine alone. Together, they created a picture that no one could look away from, a reminder that dance was not about perfect steps but about spirit. Halfway through the performance, Lily reached out her hand. Without hesitation, the CEO took it, and together they spun slowly, her chair turning while he circled around her. The crowd erupted into applause, moved by the sight of two very different worlds meeting in harmony. Lily's nervousness melted away. She laughed out loud, the sound echoing across the hall, filling every corner with pure happiness. The CEO looked down at her and felt something shift deep inside. This was not just a performance, it was a message. A little girl who had once sat quietly in the corner, unseen, was now the center of the stage, and she was teaching everyone in that room the meaning of courage. As the final notes of the music played, Lily lifted her arms high, her chair spinning in one last circle. The CEO bowed beside her, and together they ended in perfect harmony. For a moment, there was silence. The audience seemed frozen, caught between surprise and awe. Then it happened. The entire hall rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the room, louder than any they had heard that night. Some guests wiped their eyes, others clapped until their hands stung, and a few simply stood in silence, overwhelmed by the beauty of what they had witnessed. Lily's cheeks flushed with joy, her hands trembling from excitement. She looked out at the crowd and whispered, "They're standing, for me." "Yes," the CEO said softly, his voice breaking with emotion. "For you." Tears filled her mother's eyes as she watched from the side of the stage. She covered her mouth with her hand, unable to hold back her pride. She had always known her daughter's spirit was strong, but to see the world recognize it was more than she had ever dreamed. When they left the stage, people rushed to congratulate them. Organizers spoke with admiration, audience members expressed how touched they were, and some even admitted the performance had changed the way they looked at life. For the CEO, the praise didn't matter. What mattered was the look on Lily's face, the wide smile, the sparkle in her eyes, the way she seemed to glow from within. Backstage, Lily grabbed his hand tightly. "I did it," she exclaimed. "You did," he said with a laugh, bending down to look at her. "And you were perfect." She shook her head. "Not perfect, but happy." "And that," he replied softly, "is what made it beautiful." As they left the theater that night, the CEO felt lighter than he had in years. For once, his success was not measured by profits or headlines but by the joy of a child who had dared to believe in herself. He realized that this single evening meant more to him than any deal he had ever signed. The world outside might still see him as a lonely, powerful businessman, but inside he knew the truth. He was no longer alone. He had found something far greater than wealth or status. He had found purpose. For Lily, the night marked a turning point. No longer would she sit quietly on the sidelines, watching others live. She had taken her place in the spotlight, and she had shown not only herself but everyone else that dreams could shine, even from a wheelchair. As the car drove them home, she leaned back against her seat, still smiling. "Do you think we can dance again sometime?" she asked. The CEO looked at her and nodded without hesitation. "As many times as you want." The city lights passed by outside the window, glowing softly in the night. Inside the car, silence settled, but it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of peace, of a bond that needed no words. In his heart, he knew this was just the beginning. There would be more rehearsals, more laughter, more dreams to chase. And he would be there not as a CEO, not as a businessman, but as a friend who had been given a second chance at life through the courage of a little girl. The memory of that night never left them. The applause, the lights, the standing ovation, it was something Lily replayed again and again in her mind. Each time she thought about it, her cheeks would glow and her heart would race with happiness. For the CEO, the performance had left a mark just as deep. He had walked into that event as a lonely man whose life revolved around money and power, but he had walked out carrying something no one could buy: a sense of connection, of meaning, of true joy. In the days that followed, the news spread quickly. Photos of Lily's performance appeared in local papers, with headlines praising her courage and spirit. Reporters wrote about the powerful CEO who had stood beside her on stage, not as a businessman, but as a friend and teacher. For once, the articles were not about his wealth or his company's profits, but about something far greater. People admired him for reasons he had never expected. And while he appreciated the kind words, what mattered most to him was the sparkle in Lily's eyes every time she talked about how she had danced on stage. Her mother noticed the change too. Lily's laughter filled their home more than ever before. She hummed songs as she drew new sketches, now of bigger stages and larger crowds. She spoke about dancing not just for herself but for other children like her. "If I can do it, maybe they'll believe they can too," she told her mother one evening. The CEO, who had come to visit, sat quietly as he listened, his heart heavy with emotion. He realized that Lily's courage was beginning to ripple outward, touching not only him but everyone around her. He wanted to help her take that dream further. He began making calls again, this time not to investors or business partners, but to schools, community centers, and organizations that worked with children. He proposed programs that would allow kids with disabilities to participate in dance, music, and art. At first, people were surprised. Why would a busy CEO care about such things? But the sincerity in his voice, and the story of Lily's performance, convinced them. Slowly, doors began to open once more. One afternoon, he arrived at Lily's home with a surprise. He handed her an envelope, and when she opened it, her eyes widened. Inside were colorful flyers for a new community event. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Dance of Hope, a celebration for every child." "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's your next stage," he said with a smile. "An event for children like you where everyone can dance, no matter what. And you," he added, pointing gently at her, "will be the star again." Her hands shook as she held the flyer. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes and whispered, "You really mean it?" "I do," he said softly. "This time, it's not just about you and me. It's about giving hope to others too." The weeks that followed were filled with preparation. Lily practiced tirelessly, creating new moves with her wheelchair and imagining how other children could join her. The CEO worked behind the scenes, arranging the venue, gathering sponsors, and ensuring that every detail was perfect. For him, this event was not a duty, it was a mission. When the day finally arrived, the hall was packed. Families came with their children, some in wheelchairs, some with crutches, some simply shy and afraid to try. The air buzzed with nervousness but also with excitement. On stage, Lily waited, her notebook beside her as always. The CEO stood backstage, watching with pride. The music began, and Lily rolled forward, her arms sweeping through the air with confidence. This time, she wasn't alone. Other children joined her, each moving in their own way, creating a dance unlike anything the audience had seen. Some spun their chairs, some clapped in rhythm, some simply waved their hands to the beat. Together, they created a picture of unity and joy. The audience erupted in cheers, clapping along with the music. Parents cried, watching their children shine. Lily's face glowed as she led the group, her voice shouting encouragement to the others. The CEO stepped onto the stage again, not to guide her this time but to join in as one more dancer among many. He clapped, spun slowly, and laughed when the children teased him for being offbeat. By the end of the performance, the entire hall was on its feet again. The applause was deafening, the smiles endless. Lily looked around at the other children and then at the CEO, and she whispered, "We did it." He nodded, his throat too tight with emotion to speak. From that day on, things were never the same. The Dance of Hope became a tradition, held every year, giving countless children the chance to shine. Lily became known as the little girl who had turned her wheelchair into a stage, inspiring others to believe in themselves. The CEO continued to stand by her side, not as a businessman seeking recognition but as a friend who had discovered the true meaning of success. In his own life, the changes were just as profound. The boardrooms, the endless meetings, and the pressure of his empire no longer felt as heavy. He had learned to balance his work with something far more valuable: time spent with people who mattered. His employees noticed the difference. He smiled more, spoke kindly, and seemed more human than ever before. At home, Lily's mother often reflected on the strange turn life had taken. Who would have thought that her daughter's simple question, "Can you teach me to dance?" would bring someone like him into their lives? She was grateful, not for his wealth or influence, but for the kindness and patience he had shown her daughter. For Lily, the journey had only begun. She kept drawing, kept practicing, and kept dreaming of bigger stages. But she no longer dreamed alone. She had a partner, someone who believed in her even when the world doubted. Years later, when people looked back on the story of the little girl in the wheelchair and the lonely CEO, they often spoke about the performance, the applause, the events that followed. But for those who knew the truth, the real story was simpler. It was about two souls who had found each other at just the right time. A girl who wanted to dance, and a man who needed to feel alive again. One gave courage. The other gave hope. Together, they created something neither could have found alone. And it all began with a question spoken in a quiet corner of a ballroom: "Can you teach me to dance?"